Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Leap. Thank you so much for being here today. I have a really special guest with me this week. You guys all know, all my listeners know that I lost my brother in 2014. And so sibling loss holds a really near and dear place in my heart. And so today we have Antonella Ditomaso. Is that close?
Yeah, you got it.
And Antonella is a personal fitness trainer. She is a full-time banker and she is a mom to two teenage boys. And she's with us today so that we can talk about her brother who she lost and her grief journey. So, Antonella, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
So I'd like you just to talk to us about your brother, his name, who he was. Just introduce us to him.
Sure. So his name was Mike. He was 6 years older than me. He was a great guy. Like, it's funny, many years later is when I really got to know him, maybe the last few years. But he was well liked. Everyone knew him in the neighborhood. Like, when I think of his funeral, it was rammed. So many people loved him. And he was just a loyal friend, funny, a conspiracy theorist. I learned that many years later. Just one of those friends that would do anything for anyone. And he had such a good mix of friends, like every circle. And I was the same way growing up. And I think it was probably because of him, but he had so many different circles of friends and he always made the time for everyone, and whoever needed him or wanted to spend time with him, he always made that time. He loved to fish. Fishing was that was his sport. He enjoyed it so much.
How old were
Yeah,
you and how old was he
he
when
was
he
33 and I was 28, 20 or
mm.
about to be 28. Yeah.
And how did you lose your brother?
So he was diagnosed with lung cancer, and it
Wow.
was July of 2005. And he was at work one day and he noticed a lump on his neck area. And he was working, and a lady he was working with said, you should really get that looked at. And he never went to the doctor, not one checkup, nothing. So he got it looked at, and by then it was too late. The cancer had already spread into his trachea. So there was not really, radiation was the most that they could do, chemotherapy, but they couldn't operate or anything. So that's all I remember. There wasn't a whole lot of information that I was given, because when he found out he was sick, I found out I was pregnant with my first son. So I was kept in the dark for most of his illness.
Illness.
I knew he was sick. I knew he had cancer and I knew that, but I just, everything that was going on, I was kind of kept in the dark a little bit. And I understand now looking back, it's obviously because they wanted to make sure that I was, well enough to carry my son to full term. And they didn't want something to happen in my pregnancy or to me, right?
Right.
Just with the stress. So I get that, but that was difficult too.
Yeah. And we're going to spend some real time talking about that because I
Yeah.
think that feels like it's a pretty significant part of just your entire grief journey. Because what I
Mm-hmm.
call it, it's funny. I was just writing about this, and it's this ongoing question to people who have lost people that they love. Is it better, if someone is going through an illness that you get to say goodbye and you have that closure? Is it better if it's funny that I'm using the term better because of course nothing is better, but I think it's, what we call easier in the grief journey. If you've been able to have those long, lengthy conversations with somebody that you love before they pass, or if it's something that happens just like that. And
Right.
really, from my understanding and the people that I talk to, it's all horrible. As one of my guests said, you can try to prepare, but you never are. And yet, I have heard that people have had the opportunity to say goodbye, and that when you're watching somebody suffer, that there is also this blessing in the passing because it is so horrific to watch somebody you love suffer. So, and then there's everything in between. Like there's
Right.
nothing about it that nothing shortens the grieving process from my
Nothing.
perspective.
Right.
So I want to go to you though, go back to you found out he was diagnosed in July of 2005, and it was a pretty quick illness, right?
So then he ended up passing away February 5th of 2006.
Wow.
So yeah, so it was pretty quick.
It was pretty quick. So he finds out that he has lung cancer. You find out you're pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So people are protecting you from the severity of the cancer, right? Because I mean, because you're probably thinking, oh, he's getting treatment. My brother's going to be fine, because how could my 33-year-old brother not be fine? Right.
Right.
He's going to kick this.
Right.
So give us the timeline again. Like, you're carrying your child. When do
Mm-hmm.
you know that he's terminal, that he's not going to make it? Have you given birth at this point?
No. So what ended up happening was, so because of everything that was going on, at one point or another, because I was in the dark, I didn't know a whole lot that was going on. Here I was pregnant. No one cared that I was pregnant. And, I didn't know. And I've had to come to terms with a lot of that, because it can be viewed as being selfish or whatever. It's just, I didn't know what was happening, and I wanted my mom.
Yeah.
I wanted her too. And
Yeah.
so I felt like she was giving all her time to him. And so I didn't understand, like, I'm pregnant with your first grandchild and you don't care. So I got into an argument with my mom. And so when I used to teach at the gym, pregnant, I would pass by my parents' place afterwards. I'd see my brother and I maybe have a bite to eat, and then I would head home. So after this argument, I stopped that routine for about 2 weeks. And it was my mom's sister, my aunt, who called me. And she was the one that said, listen, I need to tell you something. This is what's happening. Your brother's not going to make it. And we need to tell you because I think you need to know. But I think also your mom needs you. You haven't talked to her in 2 weeks. She's sad. She needs you. Like, obviously, I felt guilty. So that night when I went to the gym on my way home, and my brother, because of where the cancer was, or he felt like he couldn't lie down. So my dad went and got him like a lazy boy chair, and he would sit at the front of the house watching TV. And that's how he would sleep. So when I came in the door, my mom came to me and like, we had like a moment, and I apologized and I'm so sorry. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because the day before my brother passed away, I went to go see him at the hospital, and, I had a huge belly. He was sitting in the chair, and there was like a little stool, and I sat all the way down on this little stool next to him, and he was rubbing my back, and he apologized for being sick while I was pregnant. So I always wonder, I'm like, did he know that I was mad? Like, he was such a protector of me. Like, we would fight, like really fight growing up. But when he needed to protect me, he would always protect me. So I look back, I'm like, oh God, like he knew that I was being, stupid me and being all pissed off that he was sick and not getting the attention that I thought I deserved, because I was young too. So I carried that a lot. So he had said to me, I'm sorry that I'm sick while you're pregnant. And my mom came in because I was crying. I said, like, what I'm going through is nothing compared to what you're going through. And this was our moment of saying goodbye. Because when my mom came in, she said, don't make your sister cry. She's pregnant. And he was like, just let me talk to my sister. Like, let me talk to her. And I said, I'm like, I hope you can hold on to see Jack, because he knew Jack was coming. He had seen like the sonogram of him and everything. And he knew his middle name was going to be Michael. Like, he knew. And he was such a big kid and he loved kids. And so he said he was trying to hold on to see him. And then that was our moment. The next day, his kidneys were failing. So he was hallucinating. And so he was in and out and not really making much sense. But that was our only moment together that we had. But that's the guilt that I carry, is because he saw that. He must have known that I wasn't coming around for a couple of weeks. Like, I felt really bad for a very long time about that specific moment, because he must have known. And I felt so guilty. But
I think,
yeah.
Guilt is something that is brought up a
Yeah.
lot on the podcast. And I write a lot about my own guilt with my brother in my book. And guilt can be a very heavy weight to carry. And it's one of those things where, we can rationalize why it's silly to be carrying this guilt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet it sits on our heart like a heavy stone.
Yeah.
And I think realistically, if we believe in the afterlife, or even if we don't, that our sibling or our loved one would never want this for us, right? They would never want us to be carrying this
No.
guilt. And yet it's something that we do. And so
Yeah.
my question to you is the guilt gone? Have you released the guilt?
Yeah, absolutely. Because soon after that, you know, after I had Jack, then I had my second son a couple of years later. And the person I am today is not the person I was back then. And that's what angers me too, because it's like I've had so much growth. You know, his death has really, it's just interesting how when you grieve and you want to learn more about, you know, the grieving process, but learn more about death and learn more about, like, I ended up learning so much more about myself. But those couple of years after my second son was born, I was just an angry person. Like, I carried this chip on my shoulder. I just felt angry. And so I went to go see a grief counselor because it was impacting my relationships with my friends. And so I saw a grief counselor. And if it wasn't through that time with her on how to grieve properly, because she's basically said you didn't have an opportunity to grieve. You went straight into taking care of your parents, then your son was born, and then taking care of your son, and then still taking care of your parents, and then you had another kid, and then you took care of him. So you really didn't have an opportunity to grieve. And so through my work with her for, I think I saw her for a good 3, 4, 5 months, it helped me just grieve. I didn't have that opportunity. So every milestone that was coming up, instead of just not being sad, that's what I used to do. I literally sat in the sadness. If, you know, my dad retired and I was like, why am I sad? And I know why, because we saw my dad work all our lives, all the things that he did for my brother and I, and my brother wasn't there to share in that retirement. And so little things like that, his birthday or just any little thing that was coming up, I just chose to be sad in that moment. And it just helped me grieve him because I really did not take that time to grieve. I went straight into taking care of everybody else and not myself.
This
Yeah.
is really critical what you're talking about right now because, you know, I work with clients around their grief and ran grief groups for many years. And, you know, I have a friend that says, geez, I don't know if I ever actually grieved my father. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's interesting when you say, I did the grief work. I want you to really help our listeners
Mm-hmm.
understand what you mean by that because grief work is not fun work. I say that it's very messy, it's very ugly. I had in this last week's podcast, this medium say that what grief does is it brings life to the dead parts of us. It brings
Mm-hmm.
up a lot of stuff that we have to
Right.
really face. Like you said, you got to know who you were. You know, we talk about a deep tragedy being the greatest gift, which everyone in the world would roll their eyes. Nobody wants a tragedy, but what we're talking about is an
Mm-hmm.
awakening to really who we are. And that happens, that transformation happens through doing the hard work. So, can you
Right.
talk to us about when you said, I did the grief work and I sat in the sadness? What did grief work look like for you? Because it takes courage to do grief
Mm-hmm.
work.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was a very long time ago, but
It's
because I'm
okay.
still doing it, like, and I think that's what people need to understand too, is there's no timeline for grief. I'm constantly grieving. Like at that time with that therapist, it was more of identifying what parts of my brother's passing did I like not make peace with, because like I said before, who I am today is not who I was back then. And I was mad that because I'm resourceful. I didn't go to all of his appointments and you know, I just that so we talked a lot about that, and we talked a lot about just like it was more about moments that were coming up, moments of, you know, if my kids would do something that I wish Mike was there for, I would just like not want people to see me being sad and I would just, you know, walk away.
Yeah.
It was, you know, talk about him. That's what she really, because the work that I'm doing now with my therapist, I feel like I'm still dealing with somehow, some way, the loss of him is still very present in my life and the work that I'm doing today with my other therapist. But at that time, she wanted me to show my kids how to grieve, how talking about my brother constantly, how it's okay to show your kids that you're crying or that you miss him.
Yeah.
Because when I'm no longer here, I want them to be I want them to know how to grieve properly, or because we don't talk about it enough. We just feel like, I look at my parents and it's like, you have to be sad. Like, God forbid you show any sign of joy, because you should be grieving. Your son died, your brother died, you have to show people, because that's how you honor them. But that's not how you honor them at all. How you honor them is by, still living in joy, still finding happiness in things. And you can be sad when in this moment, maybe I'm not going to be sad. Maybe I'm going to enjoy the moment for what it is. Like I said, grieving doesn't have a timeline. You grieve every day. I'll probably grieve him until I die. Like, who knows, right? But I think that's what she really wanted me to focus on, was I kept on hiding my grief and not talking about him with my parents even. I never brought him up because I didn't want to make them sad. But you know what? Like, those were some of the things that she asked me to do, is talk about your brother, talk about moments you had with him, talk about what he meant to you, talk about, I wish he was here to see this, because that's showing them that it's okay to be sad, but it's okay to be happy too, right? It's okay to laugh about the funny things you did, or,
You're so eloquent, because I think that you just hit on two profound things. One is we try to hide our grief. I think part of it is people don't know how to sit in other people's sadness. It can be very uncomfortable, but sometimes I don't think it's them. I think it's us. So we stop talking about it because we think there's some sort of expiration date on our grief. So, I'm not going to bring up my brother's name again to my friend. It's been 4 months since he died. We know that 4 months is ridiculous. But you said something else that I think is really important too, because if we're not doing the grief work, and I've said this numerous times, grief doesn't go away. It goes somewhere and it manifests in some way. For you, you were angry. You were angry at the world, right? Didn't know why, but it leaked out. It impacted all of your relationships. I mean, I always say grief and depression are two sides of the same coin. And sometimes we're afraid if we start crying, we're never going to stop. There's lots of different reasons that people sort of suck in that grief, but it does leak out in lots of different ways. And so if you're not crying, you're doing something else with that grief. And the other part to this, I think, that is equally important, people feel a tremendous amount of guilt to feel joyful after somebody they love dies. I am going to say that lasts a good solid year. Sometimes for people, it lasts much, much longer. And I love what you said, that joyfulness is also honoring their spirit. The one thing about my brother, he was so joyful that now I feel like the way to really honor him is to live my life to the fullest and love to the fullest. And I think that when I was talking about that transformation, I do think that death can do two things. It can soften the heart or it can harden the heart. And that's a choice. And I think that when we do grief work, it really helps to soften our heart to know just how divine and precious life actually is. Because guess what? Our brothers want to still be here, right? Like they wanted to live there.
Absolutely.
And so everything that you're saying, I think really helps to understand when I use how complex grief work is it really complex, or is it really simple to allow ourselves to be and feel what we be and feel in the moment? If that's joy, embrace it. If that is sadness, sit in it. If that is anger, scream it out. I don't care what you do, honor what you're feeling, because that is what moves through our bodies so we can release it. And what we're learning is how to navigate grief, but also weave that grief and loss into the fabric of our lives, right? You're not moving on, you're moving forward with him in your heart and in your life.
That's how you get closer to your loved ones who've passed too, right? Because of this, like, I'm fascinated by grief. And so I listen to a lot of podcasts, I read books, listen to stories. So Wayne Dyer,
who I love.
Love him. I love David Kessler too, but I love Wayne Dyer. And so he shares a story of an army vet so this dad, his son goes off to the army, and obviously he gets that knock on the door that his son died in battle. And that night it's a small town. He went out and he went dancing, and people were like, what are you doing? Didn't you just find out your son passed away? And he's like, sooner or later, I have to move on from this. I'm just choosing sooner. That in itself is just, it doesn't mean you don't grieve. It's just, that's what his choice was. I'm choosing sooner now versus later.
That's what I mean by it can manifest in other ways, right? It can manifest. I know this person, I've known him for a long, long time. And his daughter died when she was 18 years old. And 30 years later, he was still so angry. And I
Wow.
remember asking him, will there come a day when you're going to let your anger go and live again?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just this moment where this was before I lost my brother and I didn't understand how debilitating grief could be. But there is a choice to, are you going to die with the person who's gone, or are you going to choose life? And of
Right.
course, we don't need to really physically die to feel dead after grief, right? I
Right.
mean, but it's not an or, it's an and. And that's what I mean. When you feel joy, feel it, embrace
Feel
it.
it.
And when you feel sadness, feel it, embrace it. This is not about, oh, my brother died and today I'm just going to choose to dance my blues away. That's not what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I know that. But,
Mm-hmm.
but you said something else that you learned so much about you. What did
Mm-hmm.
grief teach you about you?
So that time with my grief counselor, that just helped me, talk about him more. And that really opened my eyes to grieving. And so I started, reading more about it, learning more about it, listening to podcasts. And it wasn't until, the work that I'm doing with my current therapist, it's been over a year now, and I'm learning, I felt like I was defined by my brother's death. I felt like, well, I know now today that I'm not, but what I'm learning more about myself is, I guess I'm learning to be a better person. My outlook on life has changed dramatically over the years, just learning more about how to grieve properly and how to honor my brother's life. And I know he would hate for me to just be this angry person. And he was so joyful himself. So for me, it's all about, I have to live. I have to live for my two kids. I have to live for my parents. I can't sit in sadness. I can't sit in anger. I have to be happier. I have to just be the person I know that I am. Learning more about myself, I learn about the energy I want around me too, right? So I'm learning about relationships I've had, friendships that are not good for my own energy, right? Because I want to just be happy. I want to show my kids to just be happy.
It's not an easy answer, is it? I mean,
Yeah.
I think that when you really start to do the work, and that's what I call it, is the work. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't really know how to describe it either. I started working with this woman, and it had been exactly almost a year since she had
Mm-hmm.
lost her son. And that's the other thing I want to say to people. There are no clocks or calendars to grief. And I remember when I was running bereavement groups, we liked people to at least have 4 months so that you could, because it takes a long time for just the shock to wear off. And then
Mm-hmm.
before you can even do any work, right? And that also, it's up to the individual. But I do think, and I've said this a million times, there comes a moment when you sit in your grief. And if it's debilitating, you've got to know when it's time to reach out for help, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because lots of us can't do it alone. I couldn't. I saw a grief therapist as well. And then I ran grief groups,
Mm-hmm.
and that I was continuously doing my own work. But I think that it's one of those things where it's a very fine line of when you're grieving and when you are now sinking into a deep depression. And
Right.
so, can I ask you, because you said you were pretty angry for a couple of years, what was the trigger for you to know when you really needed to get some outside help? Did a friend say something? Was it your spouse? Was it you having some sort of recognition? How did you know that you needed help?
So I had a falling out with my closest friend who I've known since I was 9. And I said something really awful to her, and it broke the friendship. So there's another loss. And it took us, oh my gosh, took us a year to get to a place where we could talk. And then it took another year to kind of come back to the way we were. And now I'm more
Are you going to make me cry?
like, she's going to listen to this because she loves podcasts. She means the world to me. She knows me inside and out, but she was here when my brother passed away, but I hurt her. So I knew that I needed help because I fractured the one relationship, the one friendship that mattered the most to me, that I needed the most in my life. And now that friendship, I think we needed it to happen anyway, because I was taking it for granted. And, because I felt like I could say whatever I want. I'm angry. My brother died. I can talk however I want to talk, right? So, and she'll just have to accept it because she's my best friend and she's been in my life all my life. So just accept it. And that was a turning point for me when it took us almost 2 years to kind of get back on track. But I am more cautious, obviously, on how I speak to people and how words can hurt. I had to seek counseling at that point because I knew that was, I can't carry on like that. I can't just treat people which way I want to treat them because I lost my brother. And so it should be allowed, because people should just understand that I'm going to be this way and accept it. And that's when I knew, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I was spiraling and it was just not right.
And people can spiral in a lot of different ways, right? With anger, with sadness, with drug and alcohol abuse, with work. Some people become workaholics. And, and so listeners out there too, who might be supporting a friend, I think that as those of us who are supporting people in grief, that we also need to be able to have those gentle conversations that maybe it's time to see somebody. And they may say no, they're not ready, and that's fine. But what you said around spewing your anger, right? That's what I call it. Like when you just spewing your hurt and pain all over the place and hurting other people. No, that is not okay. We have all done it. Any of us who have been in deep grief have absolutely taken it out on people that we love in some way, because we are a walking container of such profound pain that we're like a pressure cooker. And it comes out. It just comes out in these awful ways. I know that for me, I took it out on my husband. God love him. I mean, it was awful. I said awful things. I did awful things. And, and I think that what we're talking about is, it's going to make me cry because I think that, those people who love us, it's giving the griever some leeway, right? But also it doesn't give the griever the right to fillet people. And so these are all little indicators of when we need some outside help. And that's not the easiest thing. Sometimes people feel weak if they have to get outside help. Sometimes they'll go to a counselor and it won't be a right fit. And maybe it's not a therapist. I've said this before too. Maybe it's a pastor, but somewhere safe that you can do what you said earlier, the grief work. Because part of grief is anger, it's sadness, it's all the things. And we've got to have a place to feel our way through it.
And I think it's important too. And as I have more friends who lose important people in their lives, I try to talk to them about my experience and to just be sad if you need to be sad. But I think too, people don't know how to react to people who've lost someone.
Right.
And so because of that, no one knew how to approach me. No one knew what to say, check in, and I think that too is important for people to try to understand. Make sure you say the right things to people who've lost someone too, right?
What's the right thing? Because there's lots of wrong things that we all know. There's lots of wrong things to say.
Well, definitely. We all know the wrong things. Yes. Okay. So I think just allowing the person to talk about what that person meant to you. Share with me a favorite story of you with that person, or tell them that it's okay, that, definitely be sad, and don't try to not be sad. I wish people had told me that, because I just wanted to hide it. I didn't want people to see that I was sad, right? And I didn't want to talk about him. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm different too, because I feel like I'm weird now with death. I think I want to talk about it all the time, and it's just odd to me, right? And it's just,
No, it's because you've done the work. You're not afraid of it. That's
it's
the
probably
difference.
it's got to be that.
Me
Yeah.
too. That's all I want to do. That's why I have a
Yeah. I
podcast
just
on
want to
grief
talk
and
about
loss.
it. And I want people to learn how to, and I'll share that medium story with you, because that
Oh, yes.
had a huge impact on the last few years, because I'm at peace with a lot of the things that he came through with, which helped me, right? But I had sought out this medium at this yoga place that it was like paddleboard yoga. And so I had approached her and asked her if she could do a reading for me. And she said, absolutely. So this was at the height of COVID. So we did it virtually. And she didn't know anything about my brother. So a couple of other people were coming through, and then he eventually came through, and she said that he's like, the energy is, he's so excited to talk to me. He's so like, he has so many things to talk about. And the one thing that really stood out for me was when my youngest son was born. He's very intuitive, my youngest son. And he was like, Uncle Mike didn't know that I was coming. Like, he knew Jack was coming, but he didn't know I was coming because, you were pregnant. So I said, I'm sure he sees you, So I wanted to ask, do you see him? And the funny thing about Adam is he's a messy eater, has always been a messy eater, right? And so we're always making fun of him at the dinner table. I'm like, why is your whole place setting dirty? Like, why are you just, and the funny thing my brother said was, apparently he was motioning that, is he a messy eater? I see how messy he is when he eats. And I'm like, oh my God, he sees him. So that made me believe even more. But he, saying things about, I had wanted the kids to see a movie that my brother and I used to watch growing up, and it was What's Eating Gilbert Grape. And so I had mentioned that the week before, that I'm like, okay, guys, I want to show you guys What's Eating Gilbert Grape. And so he brought that up, like, show them that movie. And there was a couple of other things, like he had given me a message. She motioned, like, are you always writing? And I'm always writing, journaling, writing all the time. And so she said, when I'm doing that, he's with me, always with me. And then I asked for a sign. So he said that he would send me a feather. And so for weeks, I was looking for this feather. Everywhere I went, I'm like, where is this feather? Like, I hike and I'm like, I can't see a damn feather anywhere. And I was working out outside, and there was a feather just sitting, like, for weeks. And I just forgot about it. I'm like, I'm never going to see this damn feather. And it was just sitting in the middle of my workout mat outside that I had been constantly working out at, and was just sitting there. And I was like,
I love that.
Yeah. Like, she said so many things. And so, yeah. And that just brought me closer to him, right? Because I truly believe he's with me always. And so, yeah, I would love for people to do the work. It's just so important. I don't know. It's just, I would hate for people to waste their time from just being our loved ones when they transition. And he said it too. And he said that he was at peace with everything, which they do, right? They're at peace. They go in love.
They go home.
And so we need to do that too. If you want to get closer to your loved ones who've passed, you have to live in love. You have to do that if you want to be closer to your loved ones, right? And so,
and it's easier for them to come through. I mean, some people believe,
exactly.
And some people believe in signs and some people don't. And so it's been an interesting thing in my own family with my brothers, because they don't all, believe like I do. And so I feel like I see signs all the time, and I ask for signs all the time.
Me too.
And so that's where I was going to go with this, is that you can ask for signs. And one way I was taught to ask for a sign, and so listeners, you can try this too, because I do it all the time, that you close your eyes and you really envision your loved one. Like, you can see them, you can almost feel them, and that you ask them for a very direct sign. So I'm going to share this story. Okay. So there was a story, this doesn't have anything to do with me, but it's a story that I read about this woman. Her son was a boxer. And so she asked to see a set of boxing gloves. Now, she was
Wow.
at this conference, right? Because this was a medium and whatever. It was a conference on grief and loss and stuff. And so, they're in a big auditorium and they're in rows. And she, and I think she was doing it because she really felt like, as if I'm going to see boxing gloves at this
Right.
conference. Well, and oh, by the way, just a little caveat. So when you ask to do this, the sign shows up within 24 hours. Okay.
Oh, really? Okay.
That this is, yes. So she asked to see these boxing gloves. The next day, this woman in front of her drops her keys and she leans down to pick up the keys for this woman. And on the keychain were these little boxing gloves. Is that like the best story
Oh
ever?
my God. That's crazy.
Right. So I decide I'm going to do this with my brother. Okay. So my brother was gone probably a little over a year. And I was still a mess after a year. And so I had asked to see sunflowers, my favorite flower. Now it's wintertime in Maine. He died in Valentine's Day, on February 14th. So it's wintertime in Maine. Where the hell am I going to see a sunflower? I'm not going to see sunflowers, right? So it is literally 11 o'clock at night. I'm getting ready to go to bed. For whatever reason, I pick up my phone and I click on Facebook. I never even go on Facebook. And the very first thing I see is someone had posted a field of sunflowers.
Wow.
And I'll never forget. I could cry again just thinking about it because I just bawled my eyes out. Yeah. And so now I've got story after story after story after story. But before my brother died, what I had going for me is that I've always believed in the afterlife. I've done grief and loss work for many, many years. But I think that what happened is that everything that I believed in and everything I had learned about, I now had to put into practice with this brother that of course, you never think you're going to lose, right? And so I invite listeners to be playful with the signs. Be playful. In spirit world, they are playful. I think they've got a much larger view on life and what it means. And so be playful with this and see what you come up with, asking for these different signs. Since you had this experience with the medium, do you see signs more regularly? Do you ask for them? Do you talk to your brother? Like, how do you interact now with your brother in the spirit world?
So I see the feathers a little bit more regularly now, whether it's like at the door of my car, on my hikes. So I've been taking pictures of them. And then when I find them, I'm like, okay, I talk to him and I basically just say, I'm like, okay, you're here. What's up? Like, what have you seen today? And I tell him, I hope you're just happy with, if I'm making any wrong decisions, tell me, right? So I that's what I constantly say. I'm like, if I'm doing anything that I shouldn't be doing, please tell me, right? Am I doing all right? Yeah, I talk to him a lot. It's funny. I do it mostly in the car. So if he pops into my head and I'm like, okay, if he's popping into my head for a reason, so then I'll just I just talk about, what we've done growing up, or I hope you can see Jack and Adam and what they're doing, that kind of stuff. So it's more for Jack and Adam more than anything. I just cause he was he had friends who had kids and they loved him. And so I know he would have been like the best uncle.
Do you see him in your sons? Do you see parts of him in your sons?
I do, especially in the beginning when they're just really into wrestling, or just when I see the two of them fight. I remember the fights my brother and I had all the time. I don't know. It's the video games when they were playing their video games, because my brother used to play video games. And sometimes some of the things that they do remind me of him. Or I'm always like, oh my God, Uncle Mike would love that. You love that, right? Because he loved that.
And that's another way you keep him present, right? Just bringing Uncle Mike up because I know we're coming to the top of the hour and I need to be mindful of that. But one other thing that you said too, that a couple of things. One is the right and wrong things to say. And you said that sometimes it can be really hard for people to know what to do. And the way I like to describe it is that you don't have to do anything more than hold space for that person's pain. That's it. You don't have to say anything. I think the discomfort is with us, not with the griever. The discomfort is with us. Like, I feel like I want to take this pain away because I love this human being that's sitting in front of me and hurting.
Yeah, for sure.
But know that that pain that that person is feeling is serving them at a higher level, if that makes sense, because the griever is going through their own spiritual growth. For those of us that are here, we can hold space for that pain, and that's it. We can't take it away, and we don't want to, right?
Right.
We need them to have their experience. But I think it's you as the person holding the pain that it's okay if you're uncomfortable too, because, know that you want to do something, but you don't have to. You just need to be present to that pain. The other thing is mentioning our sibling's name to our parents. I love what you said, that I didn't want to cause them more pain, because that's exactly how I felt with my own parents. And then again, doing the grief work and going to the center, that we can't cause our parents more pain. It's not as though they've forgotten and we're reminding them that they lost a child, right?
Yeah.
And I remember, I've said this story 1,000 times. I'm sure my listeners who follow me are going to be like, oh God, here she goes again. But I love saying this one story, that when I said to my dad, I learned today that, at the Center for Grieving Children, that you want to talk about Rocky. And he choked up and he said, I will talk about Rocky anytime anyone will listen. And I think that's the same way with our friends. They don't want to bring up the person that we've lost, thinking that they're going to cut. But what it does is it allows us to do what we want to do, which is to talk about the person that we love. And if we're not ready, the griever will say, I'm not ready to talk about, this person yet. So again, listeners, if you're supporting people, just hold the space, and grievers, let the people who love you know what they can do for you. It goes both ways, because I think both the person grieving and the person trying to support, that we can feel like we're out on islands and neither one of us know what to do. So come together and just be present in the humanness of loss. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you have social media following or any place where people can find you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can find me at, Anto Dito, so ANTODITO, and then there's an underscore.
Is that your channel for Instagram?
Yes.
And we'll have that in the show notes as well. And so with a couple of minutes left, I'll ask you my final question.
Okay.
How do you practice self-love now? What does that look like?
How do I practice self-love? Through movement. So that's another thing that was so important for me as well, is, soon after, and while my brother was sick, I taught almost every day at the gym. I was moving my body every day, and I still do to this day. That I think is so important for people to do. So that's my self-love, is move through movement, whether it's walking, hiking, working out, weight training. That's what I do. And I think just surrounding myself with people who I learn from, truly love, who make me laugh. That's self-love for me, is reaching out to the people who I know just make me feel like I can be myself, and with no judgment. And that's my circle. And that gives me, I don't know if you're expecting face masks, or, because I'll do that too. Like, do I get massages or whatever? I do all that too. But movement is so important for me. And the people that I have around me, the energy I have surrounding me, is so important to my self-love.
Yeah. Surround yourself with love, fill up with love. And then the only thing that you have left to give out is love. And love is actually the only thing that heals. And so thank you so much for this interview, and for sharing about your brother and your grief journey, all of it. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yes, I'm so thankful.
And listeners, I hope that you're able to take something that resonates with you on your own grief journey, or if you're supporting somebody who's hurting. And I send love out to all of you. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.